Okay, so today we're unpacking one of the most fascinating, kind of head-scratching, and ultimately brilliant stories from ancient history. We are looking at the life of a man whose entire legacy is defined by this massive central paradox. We're talking about a historical titan who somehow transformed from this aggressive, blood-soaked warrior into a leader whose absolute greatest political weapon was, well, doing absolutely nothing. All right, let's dive right into this, because it is honestly one of history's most bizarre contradictions, and it actually holds a really surprising lesson for how we think about productivity today. I mean, how do you go from being a hyperactive battlefield commander, a guy who literally built a dynasty with his sword, to someone who saved an entire empire by day drinking and stubbornly refusing to do his job? To understand this wild pivot, we've got to look at where our subject, Cao Shen, actually started. Well, you see, Cao Shen's early life was anything but peaceful. He actually started out as a humble prison guard in Pei County under a man named Xiao He, right in the middle of the harsh and unforgiving Qin dynasty. But when that dynasty began to spectacularly collapse into rebellion and utter chaos, Cao Shen didn't just stay a prison guard. No, he grabbed a weapon, joined the uprisings, and rapidly transitioned into this hyperactive, incredibly lethal military commander. From his start under the Qin dynasty, his rise was basically a masterclass in kinetic energy. Cao Shen tied his fate to Liu Bang, the man who would eventually become the founding emperor of the Han Dynasty. And Cao Shen fought alongside him and the legendary general Han Xin across this fractured, incredibly violent landscape. He was everywhere. He broke armies, he lifted sieges, he crossed rivers, put down rebellions. The historical records by Sima Qian describe a man in constant, relentless motion, literally soaking the earth in the blood of his enemies just to forge a new empire. To truly grasp his absolute battlefield competence, just think about this staggering number for a second. 122. That is the exact number of counties Cao Shen conquered. He didn't just participate in founding the Han Dynasty, he was its battering ram. He was aggressive, relentless, and undeniably effective. And he wasn't just rounding up ordinary foot soldiers either. Listen to this resume. 2 rival kings, 3 chancellors, 6 generals. Cao Shen was a master of action. He was a guy who solved complex geopolitical problems by just marching an army to a city and smashing its gates. That was his entire identity. But then, the wars end. The Han Dynasty is officially established, and the pacing of Cao Shen's life dramatically, almost comically, slows down. He gets appointed as the Chancellor of the state of Qi, which is this massive vital territory with 70 cities. But Qi doesn't need a battering ram anymore. Think about any time you've come out of a deeply stressful, chaotic period in your own life. The empire was exactly like that. It was broken, bleeding, and totally exhausted from decades of trauma. It desperately needed healing. It needed a cure, not another sword. So as Chancellor, Cao Shen initially tries to figure out how to govern. He brings in hundreds of these Confucian scholars and intellectuals, but it's a total disaster. They endlessly argue, their advice completely contradicts itself, and Cao Shen is left totally unsure of what to actually do. He realizes, okay, he needs a different kind of wisdom. So he hears of this Daoist sage named Master Guy over in Jiaoxi. Cao Shen sends heavy gifts and humbly begs the master to teach him how to actually bring order to all this chaos. And this brilliantly illustrates the philosophy that changed Cao Shen's life forever. Master Guy teaches him the principles of Huang Lao, which is heavily centered on this concept of wu wei, or non-action. The core idea is basically this. Society is like a muddy pool of water. If you keep stirring it with new laws, new taxes, and new projects, the mud never settles. But if you just leave it alone, if you govern through tranquility and non-action, the mud sinks, the water clears, and the people naturally heal themselves. Which brings us to the great thematic paradox of his life. On one hand, you have the general, hyperactive, conqueror of 122 counties. On the other hand, the chancellor, hyper-passive. I mean, he embraced non-action so completely that he literally began spending his days drinking, letting the state run completely on autopilot, and changing absolutely zero laws. The energetic warrior just vanished, replaced by this ultra-passive statesman. Now, this strategy actually worked wonders in Qi. So when the prime minister of the entire Han Empire, Xiao He, passes away, Cao Shen gets called up to the big leagues. He becomes the chancellor of the whole empire. And this is where the historical records read less like a dry textbook and way more like a workplace comedy. Because Cao Shen takes his booze-fueled do-nothing rule directly to the imperial capital. To give you a real taste of his mindset at this point, Consider this completely bizarre parting advice he gave to his successor back in Qi. He told him to deliberately ignore the black markets and the prisons. Why? Well, because as he reasoned, if you crack down too hard on the gritty places where bad people gather, you're going to scatter them into the pristine parts of society and cause even more chaos. His philosophy was quite literally, let sleeping dogs lie, even the bad ones. Sometimes leaving a flawed system alone is just better than breaking it while trying to fix it. When he took over the imperial chancellery, his HR strategy was, well, hilariously subversive, but highly effective for what he wanted. He actively suppressed ambition. If an official came to him eager to make a name for themselves with strict new policies, fired. Instead, Cao Shen exclusively hired officials who were uneloquent, heavy-set, and honest. Basically people who just wanted a quiet life. If someone made a minor mistake, he'd actively cover it up just to avoid the administrative drama. And the best part, he regularly joined his clerks out in the back gardens for loud, drunken sing-alongs. Now, obviously, not everyone loved this. Other officials in the court were totally horrified by his laziness. But Cao Shen had this genius, step-by-step tactic for dealing with them. When ambitious officials showed up at his estate wanting to complain and urge him to, actually work, Cao Shen wouldn't argue. He'd just welcome them in and immediately start pouring incredibly strong, fine wine. He'd keep the drinks flowing until the officials were quite literally too drunk to speak, let alone bring up state affairs. He literally silenced disruption with alcohol. But, you can only dodge the boss for so long, right? The young Emperor Hui was getting increasingly frustrated. Here he is, eager to make his mark as the brand new ruler of the Han Dynasty, and his chief minister is visibly lazy, constantly drunk, and actively avoiding work. The tension was really building, and the emperor decided he'd finally had enough. The escalation here is just pure comedy. So the emperor doesn't really want to yell at the terrifying former general directly. Instead, he secretly sends Cao Shen's own son, who worked in the palace, to go home and basically nag his dad about working harder. Well, when the son brings up state affairs at the dinner table, Cao Shen is furious. He orders his son beaten with 200 strokes for meddling in government business. When the emperor finds out his proxy was just whipped, he confronts Cao Shen directly at court. It's a massive showdown. But Cao Shen is a master strategist, even in a conversation. During the confrontation, he takes off his hat, apologizes, and then hits the young emperor with this totally audacious logic trap. He asks the emperor, who is braver and greater, you or your late father, Emperor Gaozu? The emperor admits, I am not as great as my father. Then Cao Shen asks, and who is wiser, me or the late Chancellor Xiao He? And the emperor says, well, you aren't as good as Xiao He. So the crucial point is, this is where Cao Shen springs the trap. He says, since the founding emperor and the founding chancellor were smarter and better than both of us, and since they already set the laws up perfectly, why on earth would we mess with it? He basically tells the emperor, you just sit on the throne, I'll make sure the lights stay on and we don't ruin their perfect work. The young emperor hears this completely flawless logic and just goes, good, say no more. He is entirely won over to the brilliance of inaction. Now, as funny as this all sounds, it really wasn't just an excuse to slack off. The grand historian, Sima Qian, who recorded this era, actually provides this profound resolution to the whole paradox. Sima Qian saw that this wasn't laziness. It was a masterful stroke of statecraft born of deep empathy for the era. And honestly, it's a huge reminder for anyone in a leadership role today. Knowing when not to act is just as important as knowing when to charge forward. You really have to consider the historical context here. The people had suffered unimaginable cruelty under the legalistic, micromanaging Qin dynasty. And right after that, they endured years of brutal, exhausting, kingdom-shattering warfare. Society was deeply traumatized. Cao Shen realized that what the empire desperately needed wasn't new laws or ambitious building projects or more military campaigns. They just needed rest. The greatest gift a leader could give them was to simply get out of their way. And the people, they absolutely recognized it. The commoners actually composed a song about his reign. It went, Xiao He made the laws, Cao Shen followed them. His rule is tranquil, the people are at peace. His policy of extreme non-action was an absolute resounding success. He gave a battered civilization the breathing room it needed to lay the foundation for a dynasty that would last for over 4 centuries. Which brings us to the end of our explainer and leaves us with this final thought. We live in a world that praises the hustle, right? A world totally obsessed with constant action, endless disruption, and fixing things by just doing more. But As the blood-soaked general who chose to drink wine and ignore his inbox proved, sometimes the most brilliant, transformative thing a leader can do is absolutely nothing at all. Thanks for joining me, and keep questioning the obvious.